encounter is called Home Under the Dome, Notre Dame's engagement with the international student community on campus and beyond. This event this morning is co-sponsored by Notre Dame's Center for the Study of Languages and Cultures, and we helped to conceive the idea with them, so we're very glad for their collaboration and partnership. We have invited you all here to this virtual event, and we're glad you are here, because we're dedicating it to internationalizing conversations about global education that are of vital importance to Notre Dame. This roundtable in particular will focus on Notre Dame's current engagement with international students and their presence in our community at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. We have with us representatives from both of those populations, and they'll speak about their experiences at Notre Dame. And we also have colleagues from around the university who will be talking about their commitment to supporting international students and getting international students involved within the fabric of our life. I'd like to introduce the panelists to you. Before I do that, the way we'll be running this session is in a conversational tone. We are friends over a cup of coffee or tea or water or beverage of your choice this morning, talking about these issues that matter to us as professionals and as proud members of the Notre Dame family. So let me introduce our panelists. Leah Zimmer is our Director of International Student and Scholar Affairs at Notre Dame International. As Director of International Student and Scholar Affairs, Leah Zimmer leads a team committed to ensuring continuous compliance with visa and immigration laws governing student and scholar participation, particularly through efficient, personable immigration advising, as well as cultivating partnerships that support the holistic engagement of the international community and the promotion of the global student body and its opportunities at Notre Dame. Welcome, Leah. Lisa Oglesby, Assistant Teaching Professor in English for Academic Purposes Program Coordinator at the CSLC. Lisa Oglesby teaches in both the English for Academic Purposes program and the Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages program in the Center for the Study of Languages and Cultures. She has taught English as a second language in multiple contexts, both stateside and overseas in China, Spain, and Lithuania. Her research interests include the integration of second language acquisition theories and practice, as well as the effects of perception training on production intelligibility and accentedness. Welcome, Lisa. Jay Caponegro is our Director of Community Engagement in the Office of Public Affairs. In this position, Jay works with the Associate Vice President in the development, execution, and measurement of the institution's efforts to strengthen its relationship with the local community. In his portfolio, Jay oversees the Robinson Community Learning Center and the university's Teachers as Scholars program and collaborates with colleagues to support various university partnerships within area schools, nonprofit organizations, and government partners. He also serves on the steering committee of the university's Community Engagement Coordinating Council. Welcome, Jay. Our two students, Martina Fausto is a junior pursuing a psychology major with minors in Chinese, computing and digital technologies and digital marketing. Martina was born in the Philippines and grew up in Singapore, where she attended a K-12 international school. On campus, she's involved in a variety of activities and groups. She serves as an international ambassador for ISSA. She is on the International Student Admissions Board, which aids the Notre Dame Admissions Office, and she's also a member of the Student International Business Council and several cultural clubs on campus, such as the Filipino American Student Organization. After graduation, she plans to stay and work in the US first, and then return to Asia in the long run. Last but not least, welcome Mattia Boccuti. He is a third-year PhD candidate in Italian literature. He graduated in modern Italian literature from the University of Salerno and in modern Italian philology from the University of Bologna. His dissertation project focuses on Marian devotion in the Middle Ages and Dante's representation of his beloved woman, Beatrice. He has published articles on Dante's Divine Comedy, Petrarch's Penitential Psalms, and book reviews in the field of medieval literature. He's currently teaching Italian language to undergraduate students. He is also serving in the CPG committee of the Graduate Student Union at the University of Notre Dame. I am honored and privileged to be with you all today. I want to start with our students because we are all here to support your learning and your engagement. Martina, can you talk to us first about how you chose Notre Dame and what it has been like as an international student being here?
Hi, yeah, sure. So, a big reason why I chose Notre Dame, I knew I wanted to study abroad, but being so far away from home, I knew I really wanted a place with a strong community and some place where I knew that I wouldn't get homesick too much. So I knew as soon as I like browsed the website, was talking to alumni, current students, that Notre Dame, if I went to Notre Dame, like finding a community would be like the least of my worries. And one big thing that really taught me that was when I got accepted to Notre Dame. I received a kind of I received a handwritten letter from a current student in my like admitted package. So that was really nice because it was really personal to know that there was someone else the other side, I guess, all the way across the world that was like thinking of me and was welcoming me to campus. And it was also the only school that kind of reached out to me after I got admitted to ask if I had any questions. So the fact that they were so welcoming before I had even like confirmed my spot or said I was going just really showed you that it was such a welcoming community, and the fact that what would it be like if I was on campus. So overall, like even before you even get to campus, it's already such a very like strong community vibe. And so yeah, it's been great so far.
Martina, I appreciate you saying that. I know how hard our Office of Admissions works to recruit bright and talented students from around the world like yourself. And we pride ourselves not just in the Office of Admissions, but at Notre Dame International and all of the offices that are represented here across the university. We pride ourselves in wanting people to feel a sense of community right from the start, right? In your welcome letter, it says, welcome home. And that's a strange thing for people to hear. And yet we've titled the session today, Home Under the Dome. And it sounds as if you feel this has been a home for you.
Yes, definitely.
Uh, Mattia, let's talk about you and your journey to Notre Dame. How did you come here? We know from your bio that you came from Salerno and then from Bologna, the oldest university in the world. Notre Dame is different from both of those places. What made you choose us, and how have you started to make this place your home?
Thank you and good morning. Yeah, I applied for Notre Dame after my supervisor in Bologna suggested me to do so. I knew that the Italian section and the Romance department of languages was very good, especially for Dante studies. So that was the main reason I applied for a PhD at Notre Dame. I need to say it was a quite scary experience at the very beginning because it was my first experience outside Italy. I come from a very tiny village in southern Italy. And for the first 2 semesters was a kind of cultural shock for me. I need to admit that. But ISA and the Romance Languages Department and university helped me immensely with housing, with visa information, with other services, for instance, the AP program for speaking skills, for writing. The department helped me a lot in order to find a way to succeed or to be productive into the American academia, which was completely new. I need to say that after the first semester, even after the second semester, I feel at home here at Notre Dame, and that's a very good feeling. Even though the pandemic has changed a lot of things in the last year, now there is still a family. I think at the very end. So, and you can trust each other. You can send emails and you can receive answers in a very timely manner, and that's great. Yeah, that's great because, as Martina pointed out, we are far from home, and sometimes it's tough to go back. Sometimes it's tough to talk to our families, but it's nice to have a kind of foster parents here on campus.
I appreciate you saying that, Mattia, and you're right. You're right to acknowledge that there are all sorts of people and organizations and offices and teams and faculty members in place to help support you so that you can flourish, either at the graduate level or, Martina, at the undergraduate level. Leah, when Mattia was talking, he mentioned the fact that there were these questions about immigration rules and visas and getting settled and coming in. And I don't know, Martina, if this was the first time you had come to the US, or I know you'd been in Singapore, but was this your first time in the US coming to Notre Dame?
Oh no, I visited before. Yeah.
Okay, so you had a different kind of experience in the US, whereas Mattia did not. Leah, how do you work with students in that time period between when they're accepted by their graduate department or when they're accepted by the university, to prepare them for this shock? Because you're right, both of you are right, that being far from home on the other side of the world, in a different culture, in a different language, in a different community with a different set of rules, there's a lot of adjustment work that needs to happen. Leah, what do you do in your role, and what does your team do to help ease with that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. That's really a primary work of welcome is an important part of our work. And I love that, Martina, I love that you use the word anticipate, and you self-anticipated, and that is such a gift to know that people are preparing a place and an experience for you, at that moment of decision right there. And then that continues through the summer. It continues through those months of where you're facing different anxieties and different experiences and just different questions that come up. And so we do this through a few ways. And I'll be very honest that the pandemic has, of course, shifted some of this for us, and it's provided some opportunities for us to do more virtually and reach more students. Typically, once students make their decision, we begin that process of invitation and education around what it means to come to the US as a visa holder, as a student. And so even in Martina's case, students will come and they'll travel and they'll visit, and they'll have a very different kind of experience in the US. And there's not as many regulations around maybe a visit to the US as there is when you're a student. So whether a student is coming the first time and it's the first time they've been in a different country and you're navigating that immigration experience, or you've been coming and you've been visiting and you feel relatively comfortable with US culture as a short-term visitor, we hear again and again from students what a difference it is to actually enter, and your life is here now for a while, and your home is far away from what is familiar. And so we help students navigate the immigration implications of that, and education around what do you need, how do you go to the consulate and engage there, what are the concerns, when you get to the port of entry, what do you need to know about that experience, and then when you get on campus, what are those logistics? So you think about arriving on campus, you may not have a phone, you may not have a bank account, you may not really have a good sense if you're moving into your dorm room. You have not carried necessarily all of your linens and your bedding and your comfort things across thousands and thousands of miles. And so what does it look like to support students in setting up those logistics that can help you kind of create your own space? So Martina is an international ambassador. She's plays a really powerful role along with all of our international ambassadors in that welcome process and helping get students here and helping them get those little questions asked, like, what do I pack? Right? And it's so nerve-wracking. You just have no idea before you get here, or where am I going to get X when I arrive in the US and on campus? And how am I going to find friends? And our international ambassadors are a team of about 20 undergraduates who are ready and able to help students navigate that entry into the US and then those first couple of weeks on campus. We also have a group of graduate international ambassadors that are sort of embedded within graduate student orientation. And their panel that we host with them is one of my favorites, because they speak so powerfully about when they landed, what were the things that they did not understand and what was confusing and what was bizarre. And it often comes up, why do people talk so much about the weather? And why is that? I've been in other parts of the US, it's a Midwestern thing. What does that mean? And being able to name that for students who are coming in normalizes the experience of cultural adjustment that everyone is going to have over the next month to 2 years. It's really going to vary. Another project that we launched that we were so excited about in 2019 and that the pandemic has shifted somewhat was something that NDI hosts called Encounter ND. And that's in partnership with our 11 gateways and centers across the world, in which we work with those staff to build out programming that really helps connect students to one another, continues to grow the community that our partners in Alumni Association are doing through the Notre Dame clubs, and but really helps, in particular, helps students just set different expectations for about their time when they arrive. And we found that to be a really powerful tool for when students arrive. They just have a much better sense of what those first few days are going to be like. They've had really frank conversations about navigating those first few days. And it just helps normalize that, again, that experience of adjustment. And as much as we can do that, and then continue to build out through conversations about cultural adjustment, conversations about home after they're here for a while, is really essential to the work that we're doing. And we're already beginning it with our incoming classes for this fall, and for those students who had to defer because they could not get here last fall. So really excited about the essential ways that Martina and her international ambassadors play a role in that, as well as our graduate ambassadors.
Thanks for that, Leah. There are a lot of threads that I hope we can pick up during our hour together as a group. Certainly, the ways in which we can create communities for international students and create ways to make the University of Notre Dame a more global university. That's certainly one theme. I think another theme that we can pick back up on is this sense of belonging and feeling a part of a place, and also understanding that being a part of a place also comes with challenges that you have to overcome. And I hope we can talk about that too. Mattia, in his opening remarks, talked about the EAP program that is run out of the team that Lisa is involved in. Lisa, I'll turn it to you. Leah was talking about orienting students, being that first point of welcoming assistance during the orientation process, getting them settled, getting them integrated, and then some of the initiatives that we have. But as they get more and more comfortable with their residence hall and with their classes and their department and their school and with NDI, they're also going to branch out into other dimensions, other parts of the Notre Dame community. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you and your colleagues do at the CSLC?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the EAP program exists solely to help international students succeed, not just here at Notre Dame, but beyond, whatever they plan to do after they leave here. Our goal is to help give them the tools and the academic understanding of what the culture is like here and in similar places, so that they can sort of play the game, if you will, and succeed here. We see students from all different parts of their time here. So for example, the EAP summer classes serve a lot of incoming students that they come a month early and take some classes so they can brush up on their writing skills or their oral proficiency, or for the law school, their legal English understanding, right? So we're sometimes the first person they see in person on campus is oftentimes those classes, and that community that's formed in those classes has turned out to be formative for those students. Been a great point of contact with people, friends that they can make from the first day. We work really hard in the EAP program to collaborate with all other partners on campus. And so from the get-go, we're constantly telling them about all the other different services that they can take part in. So yeah, I mean, our goal is to be a safe space for international students where they can come and ask the questions, to say, you know what, I don't know how to do this here in this context. Can you help me? And it is a completely safe space with like a judgment-free zone where we work really hard to prepare them for the classroom, for research, for networking, all of those things that go along with being a part of academia. But we don't just Notre Dame's mission has this idea of the whole person. And it's, the work that we do is not just teaching them about how to write, or teaching them grammar, or teaching them how to talk to their advisor when they have a problem. All of those things just sort of bleed into all of life. And so we end up being a support for more than just academic skills. We talk a lot about culture. We provide a sense of community. We create spaces to make friends. We help out with spouses. In the past, we've offered an ESL spouse class where we can support the families of the people who are here, which is also really important. So we end up just sort of touching all points of life, even though our name is English for academic purposes. We get them in through there, and then we help them in any way we can.
I really appreciate you saying that. Two threads I want to pick up as well. One is talking about educating the whole person. I had actually written that down in my notes just before you had said that, because I do think we're talking about educating the whole person and also educating the whole community, and we can come back to that. The other thing is about formative experiences. And another thing that we talk about at Notre Dame often, because of our Catholic identity and mission, is formation. How are we formed with one another? How are we formed in community? How are we formed for the common good? And I think that's a good bridge to bring in our last panelist, Jay Caponegro. Jay, you have the privilege and the pleasure of connecting students to the wider community and the wider South Bend and Michiana community, to these fantastic students that we have. Do you want to talk a little bit about that work, especially as it relates to the international dimension? Have we lost him?
Am I with you still?
Oh yeah, there you are. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to talk about some of the work that we do with international students. We have, in the Office of Public Affairs, worked with campus and community partners over the years to build some infrastructure so that when students kind of settle into the Notre Dame community and feel comfortable in their shoes as international students here, and they're ready to kind of branch out a little bit, we want to create those opportunities that are meaningful for them with partners who value the kind of resources an international student brings to the university and the community. So for example, we've partnered with the Center for the Study of Languages and Cultures over the past few years to invite FLTAs to go out and speak with specific classrooms in schools and to talk with those classrooms about their languages, about their cultures, teaching them what they hold most precious or know most intimately. And what happens is that in the teaching, they get an experience of classrooms in America, right? And they get an understanding of what public schools are like in this country. And it creates some great opportunities for dialogue about what education is like in one's home country versus this country. And it also creates these really awkward, but very, sometimes creates these awkward moments where there's a lot of learning going on. So we had one international student who really wanted to cook for her classroom. And I mean, she went to the local store that had all this ethnic food. She came back, she prepared this meal, put all kinds of energy into it. And one of the children, I think it was a third grader, just went, yuck. And it was a horrible reaction in terms of international relations. But what we were able to do, because we had relationships and some infrastructure, is kind of process that, because in that person's home culture, that was a terrible offense to react so negatively. And yet this young person in this American school was just blunt and honest, and that's how they were taught to be. And so we kind of talked through the cultural differences and learned about on both ends how that was offensive, and how on the other hand, this is a reaction that would be expected in our country. So while we think there are some great opportunities to teach some facts and about culture and to teach about language in the community, we also know that this international exchange creates for our children in the local community an opportunity to become world citizens, right? To really see the bigger picture. And that's a terrific resource that our international students provide locally. We do that with graduate students. In that case, we work with our undergrads through a lot of clubs. Earlier was mentioned the SIBC is one of the local, or a very strong club on campus, and they've engaged with a number of businesses, and we help when needed to make connections, but often they have built years worth of relationships for those clubs. I would just add one more thing real quick, and that is the Robinson Community Learning Center that was mentioned in my bio. The Robinson Center has worked with graduate student families quite often, and we also provide English as a second language or a new language to spouses. And we have a pre-K, a preschool for families of international students, not just international students, but for the community. And oftentimes our international students take advantage of that. And it's a great resource to learn, to build relationships and to learn about the local culture and English, frankly, for the younger kids who are terrific. Their appetite for English is fantastic. So those are some of the resources that we've been connecting international students to, and it's been a terrific resource, a terrific experience, I should say, for our local community as well.
Thanks for sharing that. I love the story of the student and the third grader, and it makes me want to ask both Martina and Mattia about that, a similar kind of moment that you may have had during your time at Notre Dame, where you were either that cultural ambassador teaching something to a domestic student here on campus in a class or in an organization, or conversely, where you were learning something that you didn't realize you didn't know from that cultural moment of encounter, and how Notre Dame might have helped with that. So Martina or Mattia, do either of you have that kind of experience that you'd want to share?
Martina, do you want to go first?
Oh, I don't mind. Up to you.
Okay, I can say, for instance, as I said, I'm teaching right now Italian 102 to 17 students here on campus. It's my first experience of teaching here in the US, and it's great. I need to say it's great. Students want to learn a lot. They're very interested in learning languages and culture, especially. I'm trying to teach even Dante sometimes. I'm quite obsessed with that. So I'm trying to find a way to get them interested in the whole picture of the Italian culture, and they want to learn. That's a very rewarding experience. I need to say that. In terms of me learning something, I learned a lot since the moment I landed here to the US. For instance, that's a silly story, but when I arrived in Chicago, I went to the wrong hotel. So it was quite a big mistake, but I learned how to avoid this kind of situations. And day after day, I improved in terms of basic conversation, basic relationships, how to go to the grocery shop, how to buy some food and some pasta, how to find pasta here, even here in the US. It was a kind of learning experience all the time. And plus, I need to say that the ISA helped me immensely in this process. I can mention very briefly. I don't want to steal too much time, but my grandparents migrated to the UK in the 1960s. They worked in the Manchester area for different years, and they struggled a lot to create a community, to live in a community. And when I first came here, I feared, in a way that could be the case even for me. But it was not, because the community was already here, and the relationships were already there to help any students to succeed and to live comfortably with each other. So that was great.
Thanks for sharing that. This notion of creating a community and welcoming people and making people feel comfortable even as they make mistakes or even as they don't know the answers to things, that does make us a stronger community. And it also makes us, I would argue, better citizens, right? In the sense of we're able to handle adversity, we're able to deal with ambiguity, we're able to talk and act and cooperate cross-culturally. Martina, go ahead and share an example similar to Matthias that you want to. As an IA, I'm assuming that you're used to being an ambassador and also what this entails. So go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I always tell students when they're coming in just to be aware of is like, when I remember when I was a freshman, I would be talking to a lot of like American students and we'd just be having a conversation. And then as soon as there'll be no problem, great conversation going. And then halfway through when I mentioned like, yeah, back at home in Singapore, things are like this. And they're like, wait, you're from Singapore, you're not American. I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, so why can you speak English? Why do you speak English so well? And it's, I know I've been warned about this before, like not to take offense by it because I think they're just generally asking, but I think that's just one thing that still needs to kind of like be worked on, is just being like more, I guess, aware that like that just to not maybe say things in that way, or just like being more sensitive about how you ask things. So I tell a lot of students when they come in, like try not to take offense, like they're just very curious. And I have noticed that a lot with my friends and like the people I meet here. So even though they may not be so aware of, I guess like current affairs, sometimes like if I mention like, oh, did you hear about this happening elsewhere, like what's happening in Myanmar and stuff like that, they don't know. But as soon as you start talking about it, they want to know more. And they're like, oh, I wonder why I haven't heard of this. So I think that's just one thing that needs to be more of like a more global and like presence of like current affairs on campus. But what I did learn though was that even though they do ask these kind of questions, they're just genuinely curious and they do want to know more. And so that's one thing I really appreciate, I guess, about the people I've met here, is that they do want to know more, I guess, like if maybe they were given the resources or the exposure. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I want to remind people, I want to pause here and just remind those who are listening to this webcast that the Q&A function is active. So as our panelists are talking, if you have a question you'd like to ask one of us, or have a comment that you want us to address, please go ahead and use that as we continue to talk, and we'll start to weave your voices into the voices of the panel. Jay has his hand up, so I will let him go next.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Martina said. In our community, with our community partners, I was speaking to one of the graduate students who'd been out there just the other day, and she said, you know, it's almost as if it's America and then the rest of the world is an ocean. With some, the children just don't have a good sense of these other cultures and countries, and they might know some names, but what I reminded her of was that this kind of exercise of engagement with our local community is really building this internationalization outside of campus, and it's a wealth. It's such a resource for us on campus that we have the ability for our students to encounter people from across the globe. And now with some who are willing to go out there and have this kind of conversation and frank engagement with students, we're really benefiting the local community. And in the process, as Martina just kind of said, I mean, it's kind of hard to hear it from the other side, but knowing that you're making a difference in the lives of people who may grow up to be leaders in this country and how they perceive the world is just going to make such a difference. So we're so grateful, even though these things can be sometimes awkward and if not downright painful.
Yeah, you know, that's the second time you've used the word awkward. And I've also heard it in the way that both Mattia and Martina have talked about it. These moments of encounter can be very awkward, very uncomfortable, very politically charged. And I've also noticed that we've been talking around or batting around using the word global citizen at different times. And I'm wondering, to anybody who wants to answer this, what do we think being a global citizen means? What does that actually, what expectations does that put on us? And what expectations does it put on the university to create opportunities, programs, structures in our offices, our clubs, our classrooms, to make sure that we get to a point where nobody asks the questions that Martina asks and says, that Martina's been asked and says, oh, that's so embarrassing. Don't ask that question. You should know where Myanmar or Burma is, right? How do people think about that on the panel?
Jump in just really quickly because we've been having some really interesting conversations with Mendoza graduate programs about what it means to set aside international student orientation and help prepare students for like an American classroom experience, but not necessarily flip it and invite domestic students to reconsider their frameworks and enter this space that may have more diversity than they've ever encountered and more diverse perspectives and ways of being and ways of thinking about work. And so if we're putting the onus entirely on our international students and sort of expecting them to make these adjustments rather than inviting and creating a space where you're inviting those perspectives to be the experience of Notre Dame rather than to be sort of an extra piece to the experience, right? It's been really interesting how to be thoughtful about that. Like what kinds of questions, how are you in those formal spaces helping more organic, informal conversations play out so it's not like, oh, I have no idea what's happening there, but like, tell me more about what you're thinking about that from your perspective. Tell me more about what you're expecting from this conversation. Tell me, and just shifting it so it's a little broader and it has I don't want to say a more curious engagement, but the questions shift a little bit if you're having a conversation about cultural engagement with all students rather than just students who are coming into the US. And we think about that even at our own orientation of how much do we put the onus on our students, which is not at all. We just want to acknowledge it's going to be challenging in some ways, and it may not be the first semester, it may be your third semester. But to Lisa's point about creating spaces for students to process those encounters is so essential. So I think really considering how are we talking about students and their experience and considering how we're preparing them to enter these spaces, how are we equipping them to enter effectively, and how are we creating spaces for students to process. And I love that there's so many spaces and offices across campus. UCC has an international student support group for students who are really struggling or just need a place to process. That exists. CSLC is equipping and serving students in particular outside of the titles of their programs. And the same in our office. We are an immigration processing office in many ways and helping students navigate the US immigration system. And we are a space where students can be coming in with questions and processing. And we're hearing them say, this is what I need. How do we make that happen on campus for you? So I think that those processing spaces and that really considering the whole student body and how we're equipping them to engage in formal ways so that informal organic engagement is healthier is important.
I love that. Thanks so much, Leah, for mentioning the safe spaces. I'm glad you brought up Mendoza too. Leah and I are going to be working with Mendoza to work on their fall orientation next week. And I love that Mendoza is so intentional about making sure that their international students are supportive and that they're thinking of the flip side. It brings to mind an anecdote. I won't share the student's name, and it was a couple of years ago, so they're gone. But one student came repeatedly to tutoring with me because she was so unsure of how to engage socially with her American group mates. So in business school, they're assigned a group and they do a lot of work together as a group. And she was the only international student in her group, and came to weeks of tutoring appointments to try to get better at conversation. Just conversation. This is a beautiful, brilliant, very kind, very sweet person, but she was feeling completely out of her element in a group of 5 other American students who had no idea that she didn't know things like Friends, like the show Friends, or what music was being played right now, or what a particular shot is, all of these things. She kept coming to me with like questions of things that they were talking about in their group, having completely no clue that she didn't know what they were talking about. And so seeing seeing her struggle with that and really wanting to try to connect, but without being weird about it, right? She didn't feel comfortable enough to ask her group mates, tell me about that, because there was so much pressure on her to try to fit in. And so I think we need to keep keep that social aspect in mind while we're also making sure that we are giving students those spaces to process, right? Like she had to come to me to be like, well, I gotta tell you about this and I don't know what to do. Like she needed that space. And, you know, I was able to help her with the academics of it, but also, you know, help her practice real conversation. So, Martina,
you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So what Leah and Lisa brought up like really reminded me of something I really noticed when I was a freshman, was that when I came into the classroom, the professors taught in a way that was very, I guess, like the US centric. So what Leah was saying about how they were trying to get international students to be more aware of what it would be like to be in an American classroom. And I really noticed that because, for example, professors would be talking about like, yeah, so what does that mean for us? What does it mean for our government? And I remember being in class feeling a little awkward because sometimes they would reference things that I never learned about US history, or so it was just like small things like that where they say our government or what does it mean for us here. So it was very like I was made very aware that I was not like part of what they were talking about. So that's one thing I think that it's like a small thing, but it's like it's something I really noticed that made me realize that yes, okay, I'm an international student. It made me feel really separate from everyone else in the classroom, because back in my high school, it was an international school, so the teachers taught in a way that they knew everyone was from around the world, so there was no affiliation kind of. But here I just really is that was something that was like really different for me.
You know, one thing that I've
go ahead, Jay, please.
Yeah, I've observed too over the years is that the Catholic character of the university is sometimes an opportunity for us to bind very quickly with international students who come from the same background, but sometimes it's a divide or it's a barrier. And so part of the processing that I've done with students is just helping them understand what Catholic social teaching means in the context of engagement, both on campus, around campus, and then what do all those words mean, and how have you experienced similar concepts either in your own faith tradition or in other ways around the world, and then how are they similar in the way that people practice Catholicism in different parts of the world. And that kind of processing also provides a framework for understanding the culture of Notre Dame too, in many ways. And what it means to be a Catholic here is very different among students. But there are there's common ground. And you mentioned it at the very beginning, this notion of common good, which is really the bedrock of Catholic social teaching, and understanding human dignity in that context is often a conversation that I'll have in terms of orientation, that we as a Catholic institution aren't going out to evangelize the children in the public school. That's not your role. That's not our role. But it is how we interact with the world, coming from a Catholic perspective. That has some meaning. So I just add that as part of the infrastructure that complements the work that others have already talked about, I believe.
Yeah, I think that it does complement and inform and direct the ways in which we engage one another across cultures. And I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because I think it can be misunderstood or misinterpreted or not appreciated as you've pointed out. I do think a lot, Martina, about what you just said about being in the classroom and it's taken for granted that us is all of us, when in fact us isn't all of us, and we actually wouldn't want all of us to be the same, right? We want to have people have different perspectives. But I also do think, to use the word that Jay just used about evangelizing, I do think in my role as Vice President and Associate Provost for Internationalization, I have a responsibility to evangelize the notion that being global is a primary good, right? That it is actually imperative that in the classroom you don't feel othered, because we're talking about how does this help us, our country, as if we're all one group. And we do, yes, we are an American institution. Yes, we have our roots here for 175 years. But I'm also thinking back to Mattia, I mentioned the University of Bologna where you got your MA. Let's remind people that it was founded in 1088. So they were instructing students for a good 750, almost 800 years before Notre Dame came into being, right? Notre Dame's way of educating the whole person is not the only way to educate the whole person. And so I wonder, to look to our last question, what can we do better as a university to help change the climate in the residence halls or in the classroom or in organizations or in our own offices if we're administrators? How can we improve it so it's not an us them and that it really is one Notre Dame family, and we're a global university? How do we do that? What's the next level of improvement to get there from each of your perspectives? Mattia.
Yeah, if you wish, I may go. Together with Professor Oglesby, indeed, and Professor Blood Miller, I created a survey because I wanted to see what the graduate students thought about how the university engaged them, how try to help them succeed. And 33 people from 17 different countries filled out the survey, and I had a sort of interesting picture of the whole situation here on campus. Of course, partial situation, and what many students said was indeed related to social aspects. Not just social aspects, but many people mentioned that isolation is a key issue here on campus, and many students, especially in the graduate community, feel isolation as a vital point of their life here on campus. Indeed, one student, for instance, said, I quote very anonymously, he said that even though he is an extremely extroverted and open-minded person, it has not been easy to make friends here on campus. It is something very interesting and strange to read in a way, because we know that there are many ways to help students to succeed, but sometimes it's not really easy to access these resources. Many, for instance, mentioned that the counseling center, the tax return office was amazing, and the experience they had with those services was great. But still, the issue of how to deal with American students, or even to deal with students from the same cultural and linguistic background, was something that emerged among the answers that the students gave. So it's something that made me think a lot. Many students also mentioned that probably the Career Center and how the Career Center helps students to succeed and find job opportunities should be improved. I have no answers, of course, but it's what emerged from the survey, which was really helpful in that sense, I guess.
Thanks for that. I'll hold off commenting until others have commented. Other people want to respond to this question? We have 6 minutes left.
I would just add that in the Moreau first year experience, for those students who are coming in as undergraduate freshmen, there is a focus in that 1 credit seminar class that all students are required to take now about how do we encounter the other. And I appreciate the intentionality of that curriculum. And these are small classes, but and there is an effort to try to encourage folks to get to know one another and to kind of get beyond those initial barriers, whether they're language or culture or one's own biases, and helping our American students understand their biases while also seeing the value of these shared relationships at a new place and getting beyond the dorm. I will say, having taught that course this semester, how difficult it is during a period of COVID when there is an encouraged isolation in order to keep people as safe as possible while maintaining an in-class, in-person experience for our students. But so we can build on that. We can definitely build on that curriculum and hopefully be able to continue to support students moving into positions where they feel valued in this community and also understand what great value we have of their contributions.
Thanks for that. Lisa.
So I'm biased because what I do is academic support, and I always feel like students need more. So, and if we're talking about the whole person, the main reason they're here at Notre Dame is for academic work. And so at the very least, I mean, I think everything needs to be addressed, but at the very least, they need to have extreme academic support, because when you're coming in as a non-native speaker of a language and having to write a dissertation in that second language and engage in all of your scholarly work in that second language, plus having to deal with the culture of having to make friends and developing a true community while you're here, especially if you have a family, like a lot of grad students do. There are numerous challenges that American students just don't even have to think about. And so if we're going to be bringing these students here, we need to make sure that we're covering all of the bases. And I think Notre Dame generally does a really great job. There are so many, I mean, we've talked all today about the amazing opportunities that are there. But from my perspective, I have students all the time who are like, I don't know what my professor wants in writing. I don't know how to engage in a discussion in class. I don't know what the format should be of this presentation I have to give, but they're just expected to, right? And so students want the help, they need the help, but they either don't have, most of the time they don't have time to get the help, because as an international student or a non-native speaker of English, everything just takes longer. So in addition to their program already being incredibly challenging, as it should be, we're Notre Dame, it's that everything takes longer, all of their homework, all of their reading, and they just don't have the time to get the help that they need. So I'm not offering like, we need to change everything, but I think providing that academic support and making sure that we have the personnel on campus to address all of these academic issues for them is so key. Right now, the EAP program is me and 2 part-time specialists. So that's basically 2 full-time people of helping the entire campus with these sorts of issues. And so I would love to see Notre Dame focus more on supporting academically, culturally, linguistically, these students that we're bringing here.
Thanks for that. Leah or Martina?
I'll jump in so Martina can have the last word. And also, it's just interesting listening to Jay and Lisa, and I just wrote down that expression of encounter the other, and then what Lisa is talking about in terms of resourcing for students who have these additional hurdles. And I think what's so powerful about resourcing for additional hurdles is that I imagine there are actually a good number of domestic graduate students who are facing pretty significant challenges who will also benefit if we're rethinking some of those systems. But thinking about that in correlation with that, I don't know what this looks like, but I think there is something, an opportunity where we are teaching students how to decenter themselves, and rather than how do we encounter the other, because that tends to build up this sense of other. And if we decenter ourselves and our experiences and we're looking broadly, which is I know what part of that curriculum is, it's just the language of it. When we're decentering ourselves and our perspectives, then it gives us an opportunity to sit in the discomfort of that, first of all. It allows us to sit with international students who may be coming in with additional hurdles. That if we're able to knock down some of those hurdles, as in all things, if we're able to support them in that and give them access to those resources, then it is actually going to benefit every member of that graduate student community, and it's going to give us an idea of how to support all of our graduate students more effectively, which again, as Lisa said, there are incredible resources in place to do that. And I know that the graduate school is always thinking about that and how to do that effectively. And I think that's one thing I just really appreciate about their work and their lens and the conversations we have. On the undergraduate side, and I know I'm running out of time here, so I'll say it very quickly. I think that same work of engaging students, and I look to MSPS is doing some really interesting work about how to engage differently to where we are decentering and we are inviting hard conversations and discomfort into the lives of all of our students rather than one group. And so that we're all having an opportunity to reflect and examine our assumptions, our ways of being, and really grow together, and not looking to our international students to teach us, but to be look to them for community and look for new ways to be in relationship with one another and to build up the larger Notre Dame community. So those are loftier, but I actually think that those are, if we're keeping our sights on the vision of what could be in our community, it could create some really exciting opportunities.
That's very well said. Thank you for sharing that. Martina, would you like the last word before I thank people?
Sure. So one other thing that I really agreed with is when Mattia mentioned from his survey that he conducted was with career services, and NDI and ISSA has been really good with keeping us up to date with how to do CPT, OBT, and how to keep up with immigration. But I found that it's still a bit lacking on I guess the career center side, where it's tough to look for resources about how to get those opportunities. For example, I had to set a meeting with an advisor, and then I asked her what companies do you know actually hire international students, and she sent me a list of all employers that have hired international students in the past. But I thought it would be good if that was already on the website, and I wouldn't have to reach out to her to get those resources. So things like that I wish were more resources were more available, not just with the Career Center, but I guess in general. But yeah, that was one thing I remember. Yeah.
I think what that points to is the fact that the work is never done. We all have more work to do, both individually in our own individual interactions with colleagues and friends and classmates and members of the community. But we also have a lot more work to do in terms of thinking collectively across our teams and divisions and offices and clubs and organizations about how we can continue to be a fully integrated community, so that, to Leah's point, we're all learning from one another in an equalized and decentered way that will create the common good, I would argue, and really be true to the mission and vision of Notre Dame. I want to thank Ali Richthammer, who helped organize all of the technology behind this. Everyone is thankful for that. I'd like to thank all of our listeners and participants in the webinar. We didn't see any Q&A, but hopefully the conversation was stimulating and intellectually rich for you. And most importantly, I'd like to thank my panelists. All of you, let us continue this conversation with one another and with our colleagues and friends across campus. In the meantime, be well and go Irish. Enjoy the end of the semester. Thank you, everyone.